Have you ever noticed how when you ask someone, "Hey, how are you?" you'll get responses like, "Oh, I'm hanging in there. I'm doing okay." While these responses are common in our culture, as a clinical psychologist, I've started to wonder, why are we all just hanging on by a thread? Why aren't we thriving? Surviving is a state where you continue to live or exist, while thriving is to grow or develop well, to prosper or to flourish. In other words, surviving is doing what's necessary to live, while thriving is actively pursuing goals that allow us to feel a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. Personally, I didn't know the difference between the two until an important crossroads in my life. I thought I did, given my training and education in the mental health field, but no, I had internalized a scarcity and survival mindset. This gap in my understanding made sense, given that I'm the daughter of South Asian immigrants and a member of the model minority community. This is a community whose members are often thought to be thriving, but upon closer inspection have a scarcity and survival mindset. Paying attention to the mindset we carry, thriving or surviving, is so important, as it impacts so many parts of our lives, our relationships, our mental and physical health outcomes, as well as whether we pass down intergenerational trauma. Allow me to provide you with a personal example. I was 31 years old when I had my first miscarriage. I was presumed to be 9 weeks pregnant at my first ultrasound, and like so many women who haven't been talked to about their reproductive health, I didn't know what to expect. I certainly didn't expect to learn that my body had started a pregnancy, hence the positive pregnancy test, but wasn't able to complete it. I was given an oral medication that allowed me to labor the remnants of that pregnancy at home, and then, like many educated, firstborn South Asian daughters do, I turned to the research. It was sad, but it felt reassuring. The research said that 25% of first-time pregnancies end in miscarriage, and so I thought, this was just bad luck. I could live with that. No one had talked to me about miscarriages prior to this, and this isn't so surprising given the silence on so many topics in the South Asian home. What will people think if you tell them that? Why are you talking about things in our family to others? These are common statements I heard growing up, and I know my South Asian peers did too. And this don't ask, don't tell, don't acknowledge philosophy was helpful at times. It helped us avoid having awkward conversations with our parents who lived in a different culture and country. Keeping things out of public view helped save our family's reputation. We even managed family conflicts by not sharing feelings from one family member with another. We thought this was just the norm of our generation. The secrecy could be about small things like who you were hanging out with, what time you came home, to larger things like sex, abuse, trauma, or mental health issues. It's just what we were expected to do, to stay silent about it. So I was relieved when I found out that I was pregnant a year later, and everything went according to plan, culminating in the healthy birth of our little daughter. It confirmed this notion that if I worked hard and stuck to a certain path, success would follow. And it did, until it didn't. My second and third miscarriages happened 3 years later. I remember feeling so naive. I had lived in a village in India. I did research on child sexual abuse in the South Asian community. I worked in the jail and probation setting. And I worked with veterans who were in combat. I knew tough things happen to people, but I just didn't expect it to happen to me. I knew miscarriages too were always a possibility, but I didn't think that two could happen so close to one another and after a healthy pregnancy. This wasn't the life I was supposed to lead, was it? It dawned on me then that I had internalized the model minority myth. Despite doing research on it, I had bought into it. The model minority myth was introduced to America in 1966 by sociologist William Peterson in his article in the New York Times Magazine called Success Story, Japanese American Style. In the same year, the US News and World Report published an article where they shared that Chinese Americans are an important racial minority pulling itself up from hardship and discrimination to become a model of self-respect and achievement. White America ran with this. It showed racial progress after the Civil Rights era, but it essentially told Black people, if they can do it, if the Asians can find success here, why can't you? Sadly, the model minority myth is still very much alive today. As recently as 2009, an article in Forbes was titled, "Indian Americans, the New Model Minority." According to experts, the model minority myth does several things. It hides anti-Asian discrimination in the US. It makes Asians invisible compared to other minority groups and in larger society. And it suggests that Asian Americans are doing just fine. But I know the case is different. I've seen this in a patient of mine who's Indian American, and she is nervous and anxious about her performance so often because of what others might think of her performance and how she should be performing as an Indian American woman. I see this in the students of mine who are South Asian who've been bypassed for scholarships over and over again because they're thought to be doing just fine, when in fact, I know they're from low socioeconomic backgrounds and they are minorities in their specific areas of interest. Interestingly, not everyone thinks the model minority myth is problematic. It's been found that Asian adults older than 65 are more likely to say that it's a positive thing. We sound great. But Asian adults younger than 30 have indicated that it's a label that is a bad thing than a good thing. This gap in these two generations, this difference between the two generations, makes sense. You have one group that arrived here to the US with the American dream in mind. With the mindset of colonized people, they were dazzled perhaps by an education in the West. They left their families, missed their funerals, and sometimes had to give up entire careers with the hope of something better. They may have been fleeing political persecution, or in the case of religious minorities, religious prejudice. But the hardship and downside of survival mode is this. In learning to create a life of stability, we often just do that. We miss out on new experiences, in exploring curiosities, in taking risks, and in living life in a way that integrates all parts of us. We're given the message that the world is scary and anxiety-provoking, and that we have to make choices that prevent us from discomfort. As long as we're applauded for being the model community, we're cushioned from discrimination. We feel essential because of our specialties and our skills, and we feel like we belong no matter how much we stand out in spaces. But discomfort is exactly what I needed after my losses to determine what to do and make sure I made a decision that was important to me outside of my partner, my family, and my community. When my medical team indicated to me there was no particular reason for these losses, they shared the decision was up to me. I could try again, get pregnant, see what happens, or I could pursue fertility treatment. My husband and I also wondered if it was time to stop this journey and feel content and grateful for our sweet family of 3. For someone who is taught to choose a success-oriented, stable path, you can imagine how uncomfortable this decision-making process was. So I did the opposite of what I was taught to do. I went to therapy, I cried, I journaled, I talked to friends, and okay, I did some more research and reading. I wanted to make a decision that felt most authentic to me. I'm so lucky to say that through this process, I was able to create the family of my dreams, one I didn't even know I was dreaming of. At the start of COVID, we welcomed our little girl through the support of fertility treatment, and then just last summer, we brought home our adopted child from India, who we'd been dreaming of for years. This process of integration and understanding what I wanted wasn't easy at first. Different parts of me were in conflict with one another. The survival part said, don't complicate things, just be compliant. The thriving self said, follow your intuition, which I didn't even know I had up to this point. The surviving self said, stop burdening people. Stop making it awkward talking about your uterus and your ovaries. My thriving self said, no, create the community and support system that you and your family need. My survival self said, make a decision that's practical, money, time, and effort. My thriving self said, no, tap into this healed, wise self after working through your own experiences of trauma, abuse, and depression. With the support of the right therapist, a core group of people who are thriving as well, and again, some research, I was able to tap into not what I should do, but what I wanted to do. And this is what I do in therapy with my patients. With my South Asian patients specifically, I often hear themes of shame or guilt for being there and for wanting more. They've said to me, how could I want more when I have so much? Or, I know other people have it worse. You should just give my slot to them. Or, I have it better than my parents, so, shouldn't I just be grateful? And this is where I invite them to feel compassion for others, for their parents, as well as themselves. I introduce the idea of dialectics. It's the practice of holding two opposite positions at the same time. It's embracing light and dark, black and white, good and bad. By holding these two opposing truths, we're able to hold more grace for ourselves and experience a more nuanced reality. At first, my patients are resistant. They think it's ridiculous and it's weird. They feel like they're betraying the values they were raised with. They feel it's luxurious or indulgent. But with time, we tap into their unmet needs, undiscovered feelings, and they start to imagine life and relationships they never thought possible. I've seen this in the patient of mine who's South Asian, who resisted coming to therapy for so long despite having experiences of sexual trauma. She thought it would be a shame to her family to come and talk to about it with me. But being in the room with someone who looked like her and was from a similar background, she realized not everyone held these black and white thoughts and would judge her. She's able to see herself now with more compassion and see her experience through a different lens. I see this in the South Asian patient of mine who's older and is so worried about retirement. He thinks he needs to keep working since that's been his role for so many years. And if he stops, what if his family will suffer? But with time and rapport and exploring what is actually true, he can now envision a life after retirement where he can explore joys he never got to see, like hobbies. With each of these patients, we see this narrative of survival, and we see how it impacts their decisions, both big and small. We move away from that don't ask, don't tell, don't acknowledge philosophy, and we invite an approach of understanding, curiosity, and perseverance. We acknowledge their parents came here never resting, always working hard, all while being brown in white America. We know that they didn't have time to engage in self-care or couldn't afford it and had to play catch-up with their white counterparts who had certain intergenerational privileges and social capital, all while mourning what they left behind and possibly reckoning with their own traumas. But we also talk about a better life can mean different things for two different groups of people. For one, it can mean a house, a marriage, and a job. And for another, it can mean the permission to rest, to say no, to hold boundaries, to break intergenerational cycles, to recognize our parents had limitations without guilt, to choose a different life course if you feel like doing so, and to live a life that's more values aligned. I ask each of my patients these questions often in our sessions, and I encourage us to do the same. What is your intuition telling you that you need? How does your body feel when you imagine staying in the status quo? Whose voice is guiding in your decisions? Yours or someone else's? Are you surviving or thriving? In the words of poet, activist, and author Maya Angelou, surviving is important, thriving is elegant. It was my parents' necessary gift that allows me to be here today and exist here today. But it is my pursuit of thriving and my journey towards thriving that allows me to stand here as a psychologist who loves her patients and her work, as a mother to 3 sweet little girls who all took their own journeys to come to us, as a person healing through her own traumas, and as a woman dedicated to breaking gender roles and the model minority stereotype. And so with appreciation for those who came before us, who gave us the foundation to survive, may we all break cycles to thrive elegantly and with wholeness for ourselves and for those that are yet to come. Thank you.